All right, ladies and gentlemen, what's up? This is the Ascension of Babylon. What we do here is we talk about the occult, we talk about spiritual self-development and self-development in general. If you're new here and that's your thing, absolutely subscribe to the channel because I'm going to be posting very valuable information quite frequently. And what we're going to be talking about today is the spirit or the extraterrestrial intelligence known as Lucifer. Most people, when they hear Lucifer, they think bad, they think evil, they think this evil entity that is wanting to take their soul. And that's all a mass collective program that has been run to intentionally keep people away from Lucifer, because this is a very liberating force to work with. And this is a force that if you start working with it, you're going to start seeing things for exactly what they are. And there are people that operate in a very narcissistic and sociopathic way that don't want you to wake up. So they take reality or your understanding of it and they invert it. They flip it upside down and they teach you through the major industries that being inauthentic is essentially authentic, and they teach you that authentic is inauthentic. So they kind of flip everything upside down. And a lot of people buy into this kind of reality. And a major way that they do this is using stuff like religion and the new age communities and Hollywood, the entertainment industry, to condition your subconscious to think that Lucifer is an evil entity, to think that Lucifer is an entity that wants to harm you, when in reality, Lucifer is an entity that actually has the highest evolutionary benefit of the entire human species in mind. And anyone that actually works with Lucifer on a personal level can attest to the changes and to the shifts that take place in their lives that are always in harmony with their highest evolutionary benefit. This is a very powerful entity, and if you start connecting with this entity, your life is going to change for the better. Now, that doesn't mean it's not going to be easy. That doesn't mean that it's going to be easy. In fact, you might experience a lot of chaos. There might be a lot of upheaval. There's going to be a lot of letting go of old patterns that needs to take place. But that is what Lucifer actually represents when we're looking at Lucifer a little more symbolically. Lucifer represents becoming aware of your shadow and all of the different vices and protective adaptations that you've created to show yourself away from your shadow parts that you actually need to go into to be a fully actualized, authentic version of yourself. So when we're working with Lucifer, there's this descent into the shadow, this descent into our personal underworld, so we can process all of the suppressed energies that have actually been running our lives subconsciously. And going back to like the 1% and the people that kind of program us to think Lucifer is bad, they understand how the mind works and they want to keep you in a confining matrix. They want to keep you in a box to where you're addicted to substances and you're addicted to dopamine and you're addicted to certain false identities that you create as a form of protective programming in the psyche. And they want you to have all this unhealed trauma in your system because that frequency actually locks you in a timeline where they can keep controlling you. But if you start working with an entity like Lucifer, those suppressed energies are going to start coming to the surface to be felt and to be worked with and to be released, which is going to raise your frequency. You're going to become aware. You're going to see things that you weren't able to see before. You may become more psychic, and over time, not right away, but over time, your life is going to reflect more of your authentic self back to you versus what it may be reflecting right now, which is, the limiting behaviors, the limiting thought patterns, the fragmentations in your psyche, and the suppressed emotional resonance that you carry around with you without necessarily being aware of what you're actually carrying around. So when we're working with Lucifer, this represents the light of our awareness that we find within the shadows, within our personal underworld. And this is why Lucifer as well is associated with falling into hell or falling into the underworld. Now, the myth itself, for the most part, is really not true at all. But even within the lies that are intentionally promoted, sometimes there could be a subconscious driving force behind it that is true, if that makes sense. Meaning, in Christian mythology, Lucifer is this angelic entity, and he disobeys God, and there's this big war, and then he's cast into hell. None of that's true, none of that's true even a little bit. However, when we want to take away certain symbolism from it, the descent into hell represents the descent into the underworld that we experience when we're connecting with Lucifer. And our underworld is not a place of punishment. It is a place where all of our fragmented shadow parts are waiting for us to retrieve them and then reintegrate them into the whole of what we are. And, it also represents Lucifer being a very balanced being, just like we all are. There's the positive polarity and there's the negative polarity. And just like a battery, there's two sides that create power and two sides that need to be embraced. So Lucifer is truly an energy of light and of awareness, but is also an energy of darkness. And it's actually the darkness that all things within our multiversal structure actually originate from. Everything originates within the void, which you can think to be almost like this cosmic motherly space, like a womb, where all things that take a form originate from and come from and kind of, I think the word would be ruminate in. They sit in this space of infinite potential before they become a solidified a solidified potential in our multiverse. So a star, a planet, a galaxy, a soul, an alien species, whatever it is you can possibly imagine that comes into form, it starts within the void. It starts within this great cosmic womb. It starts within the primordial chaos space. It starts within the darkness. So Lucifer represents getting in touch with this darkness. And this darkness isn't just out in the stars somewhere. The blueprint of all of creation exists inside of us, and we can connect with that primordial void space when we're channeling Lucifer. And that void space is existing as the deepest portion of our unconscious mind. So once again, when we're working with Lucifer, we're becoming conscious of the unconscious. In fact, if we're going to work with Lucifer authentically, it is absolutely 100% required that we're intending to become conscious of our unconscious at some point, or we're not going to be able to have the most beneficial relationship with this force, because that is the direction that Lucifer is always going to be intending to move us into. This is where our source energy connection is kind of lying almost in a dormant space because we get disconnected from it during, societal conditioning and early childhood trauma. So Lucifer is a being that brings us into that source energy connection. So Lucifer is not evil. Lucifer is not bad. Lucifer doesn't want to hurt you. Lucifer absolutely wants to help you and wants to give you support in your process of better understanding yourself and remembering what you are, if you're willing to do the work that you need to do. So when we're talking about these very powerful spirits, what they're typically going to be is extraterrestrial consciousness. And they're not actually a singular entity, although they will project themselves to humanity in the form of a singular being for the purpose of our understanding. But that projection is usually just an extension of something that is much larger. And you can think of Lucifer as being like a collection of extraterrestrial, higher dimensional or higher density sentience that comes together to work for a very specific evolutionary purpose. And there's different masks that come from this current of energy. There's different personifications that human beings have given different titles over time. And I think that oftentimes it's just a different version of the same extraterrestrial current of energy that is projecting itself to humans for an evolutionary purpose that is meant to benefit our evolution, because everything in the multiversal structure itself, everything in creation is connected. So as it's helping us, it's also helping a part of itself, because we are all extensions and we are all living parts of each other. We are all connected by the same source energy. Now, Lucifer is often associated with the planet Venus, meaning the morning and the evening star. And this is also symbolic. So when we're thinking about the morning star, where, thinking about this little light in the sky that we see as the day is beginning. So this represents the light and the positive polarity. And when we're talking about the evening star, we're kind of talking about this little light in the sky, which is actually the planet Venus. It's just very, very bright. When we're talking about the evening star, we're talking about what we see before the light turns into darkness. We can see the evening star when the day is transitioning into night. So this represents the balanced polarities of this force known as Lucifer. It also represents that Lucifer is a force of transition. And whenever we're talking about transition, we are talking about death energy. We are talking about something moving from one space into another. That could be your living location, you living where you do now, to having to transition somewhere else. There's always going to be the presence of death energy. Maybe you go from being in an unhealthy relationship to not being in a relationship at all, and maybe having to heal through certain things that took place in that relationship that you were in. You're kind of in this space of transition and self-reflection. Maybe you're a cigarette smoker and you stop smoking cigarettes. So all of this is going to have to do with transition, and all of this is going to have to do with death energy, which is what Lucifer is also heavily associated with. When you work with Lucifer, there's going to be many deaths that take place within your life. These are going to be ego deaths, meaning as this death energy is beginning to alchemize its way and find its way into your energetic field, things in your life that are not actually serving you are going to have to be let go, the unhealthy relationship, the unhealthy coping, the unhealthy identity addiction that you might not even know you're fueling, you may start to become aware of when you're working with the light of Lucifer. Remember, Lucifer is like this light that is cast on our shadow so we could become conscious of the unconscious and all of the different patterns in it that maybe are driving us to be something that we're not. And as this is happening, there's going to be a dissolution of the manifestation of those patterns. So this could be the relationship, the unhealthy coping, maybe even where you live. Maybe it's not even a healthy place for you to live and you need to go through like a transition. These are the things that are going to take place when you're working with Lucifer. And at times, the energy of Lucifer could be rather chaotic. But if you know anything about chaos, there's always this pattern of order that comes from the chaos. The chaos is not a bad thing. It could be a little overwhelming, especially if you're not expecting it when you're working with a being like Lucifer, but it will always lead you to a more authentic sense of order within yourself, meaning your sense of self-identity, your mental and emotional states, and of course, in your life, meaning your relationships with people, your job, how you make money, where you live, and things of that nature. The point of working with Lucifer is to live our lives as the most authentic version of ourselves that we can. And that is what the light of Lucifer is going to initiate for you. Now, going back to death and transition, Lucifer is associated with something that's known as the tree of death or the Klipothic tree. And this is going to be the underworld. This is going to be our personal unconscious, the mass collective shadow or the mass collective unconscious, where suppressed energies are stored going back to the very beginning of our human species, all the way up to now. So think about how much suppressed negative resonance that actually is. And the underworld even exists on a solar system, galaxy, universal, and multiversal level. So Lucifer has a high level of influence over the underworld plane, which is why when we're going through something known as Klipothic initiation, when we make it to the top of the tree, there's something that happens that can be called the crown or the crowning of Lucifer. And crown represents our crown chakra and us beginning to operate from that crown chakra in balance with all of the other energetic centers. And it represents that we're now operating from more of a Luciferian awareness. In short, we're downloading the consciousness of Lucifer or the energetic resonance of Lucifer. We can even say the energy field of Lucifer into our body, channeling it through our nervous system, and now we are a physical representation of that force. And these are some of the highest levels of occult initiation that a person can actually experience. What I really want you to take away from this video is Lucifer is not an entity that wants your soul. This is not a being that wants to take advantage of you. This is not an evil force that we're talking about. This is an evolutionary force. And this is a very beneficial force to actually work with. Now, another thing, Lucifer is not an energy that wants you to worship it. Lucifer wants you to become an open channel for its energetic essence, so then you can channel that energy into the world by just being who you are, without having to perform the ritual or perform the offering or whatever it is that certain people do to connect with Lucifer. Real embodiment of Lucifer is just living your life in a state of awareness and living your life in a state of having acceptance for all of your shadow parts that you are then integrating by having an acceptance for them. And when you work with Lucifer in this very direct way, life becomes the ritual and this Luciferian energetic current begins to channel through your nervous system effortlessly without you actually needing to connect with Lucifer, let's say maybe the way you did in the beginning. So I'm not saying rituals aren't powerful. I'm not saying there's not some type of science behind maybe an offering that you could give during that ritual. And I'm not saying there's not a science behind some of the practices that some people would view as worship. But all of this is meant to lead you to being the embodiment of Lucifer and channeling that energy through your nervous system. Lucifer does not need your worship. You want to become a physical embodiment of this force, and that is actually the higher purpose of worship of of working with this energetic current.